Okay, recording now. So yeah, I'm gonna talk about REST and RESTful. Let's find my notes. I should have notes. There. I should be able to bump this back to full screen. There we go. Okay, so why REST? Before REST came along, and REST is a shorthand, the web was messy. I don't know how many people, and feel free to shout out or throw into the chat. Let me open my chat window. I don't know how many people were around back in the day, early eBay or Amazon or really anything that was going on the web, maybe 10 years ago plus. But URLs looked crazy. They still Amazon still kind of resembles it. It's RESTful to a point, and then there's a lot of parameters, query strings that are thrown on there, but the base of it is RESTful at this point in time. But really, everything was being used however every developer wanted. So one developer would develop a website and the URL structure and HTTP verbs, get or post and patch were being used for something. And on another server developed by a different web developer, they were all being used differently and being set up differently. And it made it really hard for people to collaborate. It made it really hard for, if you lost a developer and a new one came onto a job, for a business to, get somebody up to speed quickly. Things were just really, really messy. And it wasn't good. This was a pain. It sucked to just flat out, explain it as it was. Yeah, something like this. Right here would have been how you get the posts for an author, and yeah, that's no fun. That's not clean, that's not concise, that looks ugly, that's complicated. And then if we went to a completely different website, let's say a blog site that had posts and authors, this would be completely different. And that was a big pain point for everybody. So after, as we've seen in Rails and as we've seen in examples in the curriculum, there's something a lot cleaner, very semantic, maybe not semantic is the right word, but very readable and easy to understand. We say, okay, we have authors, then we have the first author, and then we have their posts. And that pretty much kind of makes sense, English-wise. So things got better. So history about REST and how it got standardized, so to speak. It's still not a rule. You can still make URLs however you want and can do whatever you want. You can't do that within Rails. Rails will enforce REST on you, and if you try and break out of it, it will be very, very, very unhappy, and you will be very unhappy because it's not designed to be done that way. And when you try and fight against Rails, you typically lose. Or maybe not lose, but life is not fun that way. So REST came from, if you've read deeper into it, been around 17 years now. So 2000, a guy named Roy Thomas Fielding brought REST to the world in his PhD dissertation. He wasn't a web developer. He was writing a PhD. The paper is named, you can Google this and find the whole full text of the paper online. It's a PDF. It's really easy to find. It's like 150 pages or something, so I didn't read it, but feel free if you want to. Architectural Styles and the Design of Network-Based Software Architectures is the title of it. And it was towards a doctorate of philosophy in information and computer science. And I found that interesting, that it was towards a doctorate of philosophy. Nothing technical, information and computer science, but still the philosophy and kind of the thoughts around the technology. REST is, like I said, an acronym. It stands for Representational State Transfer. And among other things, it suggests a standard way web apps should structure their URLs. There's a lot of stuff in the paper that I didn't look. I'm assuming Dr. Fielding at this point in time, I'm assuming that they gave him his doctorate after he wrote this, considering the impact he had on the world. But there's one section that talks about this. There's a few other things that were talked about in this paper that people have adopted, but really this was the big thing that impacted everybody. You with me, guys? Feel free to ask questions and be devil's advocate about things. So whether it seems like it or not, developers can sometimes agree on things, but sometimes we can't too. One example is there are 7 HTTP methods defined, but we still can't use them all. So we have get, we have post. That's why when you're making forms, you have that hidden field that's telling your post to be done as a patch on your edit forms, things like that. Because we can't use all the verbs for whatever reason that is. But REST encapsulates a way of structuring a URL so that access to specific resources is going to be predictable as well as standardized. So let's continue on. This is pulled directly from the paper. And this is what he was saying about when he was doing his research and such. And I'll read this because I think it kind of hits home what was going on at the time. Throughout the HTTP standardization process, I was called on to defend the design choices of the web. That is an extremely difficult thing to do within a process that accepts proposals from anyone on a topic that was rapidly becoming the center of an entire industry. I had comments from well over 500 developers, many of whom were distinguished engineers with decades of experience, and I had to explain everything from the most abstract notions of web interaction to the finest details of HTTP syntax. That process honed my model down to a core set of principles, properties, and constraints that are now called REST. So he took a very academia standpoint. He wasn't building these things. He was just gathering all the information and coming to a conclusion of what makes the most sense. And I think that sometimes we have to step outside of what we're doing and get that other opinion. I think that's kind of why the team experience is so valuable in building apps. So these are the Rails RESTful principles. If you've been through the RESTful part of the curriculum, you're going to recognize this graphic. I pulled it straight from the REST section of the curriculum. I think it's just a great graphic, period. I actually created this presentation with somebody else to show a bunch of people who write JavaScript, and I still use this because I think REST imposes, or Rails imposes REST structure very, very well and makes it clear. And Rails has RESTful principles built in to it. It's in the core. That's why when you generate resources, these are the things you get. Rails generate resources things, and you would get these routes. You would get these HTTP verbs. You would get all of these things created for you. These controller actions would be waiting to be filled in. These 4 views would be waiting to be created or edited for you, because it imposes it on you. And I think that's awesome. That's great. I think having things set up and structured in a way that makes sense and enforces strong core principles is good. Now, do you always have to do things this way? No. I wouldn't say to fight against it to begin with, but as some of the labs show, we have things like slugify. I remember that's one of the methods that needs to be made in a lab, where, you know, we're not going to keep things in the browser by ID numbers. You know, we're going to keep them by their full text name, or whatever it may be. So while these rules are great starting points and great places to hone a core structure, they are no means the be all end all. Like I said, this is a theory that made sense to a lot of people, so people started doing it. When enough, you know, developers start doing the same thing, it becomes standard practice. And when enough of those developers are senior developers, they're teaching other developers to do it. Next thing you know, 17 years later, everybody does it this way for the most part, if they want people to use their stuff. If you come across an API that is not a REST API, and is still a standard, you know, GET request API, GitHub's newest API is GraphQL, so that's a little bit different. But most people are doing REST APIs because they make sense, and it's the standard now. So some things to remember. I have one more slide after this, but it's just my name and the other guy's name. But I jumped through his part of the presentation because he was talking about APIs. So this will be the last slide I have, and then I'm hoping you guys have some questions, some devil's advocate, some things that don't make sense, some things that you want to discuss. If not, I guess okay. But I hope you've thought some things up. But things to remember, as I was saying, REST is an architectural design pattern. So it's not a framework or code in of itself. It's a pattern of design. It's this slide, you know, and you insert anything you want in here, but it's this pattern, and that is what REST is. REST was one of those things that I always heard about and could never wrap my head around. What is it? What is it? What is it? Well, it wasn't anything I could, quote unquote, look at or code I could write. It was this design pattern. And that always confused me until I got this understanding of it. Many web frameworks utilize RESTful design principles in some form or another. So Rails is a great example. It enforces that on us. It pushes that down on us and makes us use it if we want to be friends with Rails. If we don't want to be friends with Rails, we can fight against it all day long and get around it. But for the most part, we want to just work within those confines in Rails. If you're thinking about not, I highly suggest not trying to fight against Rails. I know very senior developers that lead teams who say, don't fight against Rails. If you're going to use Rails the way Rails wants you to use it, and don't try and do it otherwise, because you'll end up not happy. A big key also is RESTful routes have a clear mapping between the URL resource and the corresponding controller actions. So going back to our graphic, I don't know if you can see. Oh, it's this laser pointer. Woo. I don't know. I guess you can see this. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but so like get HTTP verbs and posts. Oh, but I can't click. Okay. Gets and posts to the base URL of the thing, of the controller, are going to go to clear connection. A get is going to go to an index. Post is going to go to a create route. There are clear connections between the verb and the controller action. A get to new is going to go to the new form. A get, patch, or delete to a unique identifier, an ID, which is the standard one in Rails, is going to go to a show, an update, and a destroy. And these all connect to something. Then a get to an ID with an edit, it's going to go to the edit route. And then corresponding templates for 4 of them. And then there are 7 potential RESTful route options available. No more. You can do less if you want, but there's 7 that you can choose from. Back to this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's only 4 different URLs, or there's 7 different routes that can happen inside of our controller. Does that make sense? Questions, comments, concerns, issues? Did you understand this before? Did you not understand this before? Did this help? Is there something else you want to talk about? Did you like this setup? Did you like this format? Would you rather see my face talking all this? Are you guys just sitting there?
I'll break the silence. So this was helpful just to kind of clarify all of that. I feel like I have a good understanding of the basics, but then I start to get tripped up when I start to have other models and relationships. And I haven't gotten to the part in the curriculum where we start nesting routes yet, but is there something to remember when you start having a more complex structure as far as setting up URLs?
Well,
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, in Rails, that's going to be in the routes or the config routes for the most part. So I wonder if there's like a standard notepad on the web somewhere that I can just type into. Possibly. Probably not. Actually, I know where I can go. Just. Perfect. So here we have, or we can go with posts and authors. Authors would have many posts. Okay, so let's say we have an author and there's our first one. So that's cool. And then we have, author, and that's him. But then we want to see only that author's posts. So it's really just tagging on afterwards. So then if we wanted to see a specific post, that would be, post 1. And then let's say posts had comments. And we want to see all of that post comments. And it kind of just continues on from there. It's still following the same convention. So let's say this post, we wanted to edit it. It would be edit. Sort these a little bit better. So really, it's just tacking on these sections on top of each other.
Gotcha. That makes
so
sense.
We're going to go to the show page with the ID, and then we're just going to slash and start again, whatever is nested. And then the routes is where you'd handle the actual controller actions and such, and how you want those to work. If you actually want all of these routes or not, sometimes you're just like, I don't want to be able to see all the authors. I only want to see the posts for an author, or only want to see all the posts. So I don't want to see, individual posts on or whatever. And then, yeah, there's those things that you can think about if you want to have, because if you have a specific author show page, then you have a nested page as well, you have to handle that in your controller, which is kind of outside of the discussion of REST, but it can get complicated for sure. But that's also a reason that we typically don't nest things too deep when we get there. Like, I don't think we might not do something like this. When we get to here, we might just, if we want to see all the comments, we could chop it down to something like this instead. And then we could have a link back to this prior one.
Okay.
Type of thing.
Gotcha.
To that. So all the links kind of keep our URL structure from getting too nested. But typically you also won't, I guess like an online store, you could get dug down deep into it if you really want to. But you also wouldn't have all of the pages. You'd have a show page and an index page, and that would probably be it for the most part. You wouldn't have all the other routes necessarily.
Okay.
But yeah, it's really just RESTfully stacking them after each other. So this is like 3 routes nested.
Cool. Thanks.
You're welcome. And then, like, I think we've all seen, it doesn't always have to be a number. Like, we have posts, like a lot of blogs, where you have those, this is the blog title, and that will have comments type of thing. As long as, we're keeping this true for the whole blog, where, every blog post has the title, then we're sticking true to the design pattern of being predictable and of being easy to use. Any other questions? Anything else you guys want to have study groups on?
Hey, Seth.
What's up?
Hey, you doing okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I came in here because I don't know, I feel like I'm trying to make this whole RESTful routes like more complicated than it needs to be. I don't know why I'm overthinking it. I mean, what you've shown makes sense, but I guess going into this, I don't know why I was just struggling, thinking it was more than this approach or this design principle.
Yeah, I think, like I said, it's one of those concepts that we hear it everywhere, and it seems like it's this really big thing, but it really isn't. It's something that a guy who was writing a paper figured out and he was like, "Hey, this makes more sense than what everybody's doing." And people were like, "Oh yeah, it makes sense. Let's do it." Really, it was, and it's really just coming back to this over and over and over again. And not fighting against it, especially in Rails. Don't fight against it in Rails. Use it and understand it. It all comes down to these 7 things and these 7 actions, and they all have, they all play their role, and they all play their spot and their piece. And this is, if you get these down, then you're going to know, okay, what am I trying to do here with this thing? Trying to edit it. Okay. So I need to have, this is the URL it needs to be at. This is how it's structured. This is where it needs to go after it's edited. It needs to be a patch to this route. And, these things are standardized in Rails, and, it's not open to interpretation. Well, you can force it, but if you're, we're just using vanilla Rails, this is how it's done. And yeah, it's not, this big hairy.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's what's complicated for me, I guess, is that, without this design principle, like laying out your routes could be really troublesome. I guess that's why the internet was probably a mess for a long time.
Yeah.
So
Actually,
I guess started. Well, I'll let you finish. I'm sorry.
no, I was saying I searched really hard to try and find a couple sites that are still not RESTful, and I think I couldn't find any anymore. But eBay was a big one for a long time.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
When I was younger on the computer, I didn't really spend a whole lot of time thinking about that, just clicking links, when you would go through a search engine. But, now when you go from, using the web to starting to design things from the web, you start to be more conscientious of that stuff.
Yeah, it's still pretty, like ITM, it's an item. And it's using the slug of the title, and then that's probably the item number, to be more specific, or the option number, because there's probably multiples of these.
Yeah.
And instead of tagging a number onto the end of that, they made that it's unique. And then these are all just stuff that I'm sure they track everything.
I'm sure.
And yeah, these are just all of their query strings that tell them that I clicked that picture, and they're going to figure out if I actually bought it, or how long I stayed on this page, and what I looked at, and all that stuff that yeah. But yeah.
I was thinking about earlier when you mentioned, it's been a little while back, but we had a lab where we had to slugify a couple of names. And is that something that you ran into later? I haven't had to do that since that lab, and I don't know if that's just because, is that like something that's practiced quite a bit? I feel like I need to go back and maybe look for that lab and like refamiliarize myself. I don't know if that's something that I'm going to be needing to utilize like in a project later.
No, it's nothing on my app. It's nothing that you'll need to, quote unquote, need to know. It's just something that's in, I think maybe it was the music library.
Yeah.
That you had to slugify the MP3s.
Because it was like, I guess using slugify is like, is trying to filter or search for a resource, but you're using its actual name. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's nothing that like I think you need to burn into your brain and know how to do, because it'll also be different for different sites. Like eBay had its link was all cap, or it preserved capitalization, whereas others won't, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But really, it was just one of those. Dan Palmer is unsafe, apparently. But it's just one of those things that I mentioned has.
Yeah, I don't know why I was actually thinking about it earlier today, because I'm building my Rails app, and it just popped into my head, and I thought, I wonder if that's something I might have to use later on. Then I haven't. I've just really been focusing, because I just started my Rails project 2 days ago, so I've just been focusing on making sure that the databases are set up properly, and my models are set up and associations are set up. So I haven't even really started to lay out my route yet, or my controllers.
Yeah.
So I've just been trying to write tests for everything, and I was just kind of thinking in my head today. I was wondering if that was something I was going to run into, and then I'm also thinking about nested routes. So, but
yeah, you're not going to run into Slugify and things like that.
Yeah, I'm not going to.
You can do it if you really want to, but I don't think it's necessary. Well, it's definitely not required. I know that much.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And my suggestion to everybody, based on my experience, is to get the project done to the requirements and keep a note, like a markdown note in the root of your project repo with all the things that you want to do.
Okay, gotcha.
But aren't required. Unless you don't have a timeline at all of when you'd like to finish the program, then go ahead and dive as deep into projects as you want to. But I think most people have, somewhat of a timeline they want to be on and try and hit to an
Yeah.
extent outside of
Yeah.
life and, getting in the way. It takes longer than anyone thinks it will, but, still, the project can take, if you do everything you want to do, and then there's always going to be more things you want to do, they can take a really long time.
No, you're right.
And you can look back and say, wow, I spent way too long on that project, when in the end, I really didn't need to. So I like giving people the advice of, hey, do the project requirements, everything else that comes to your mind, write it down and keep it in the repository. So, you're not writing on a piece of paper, it's just there. I wrote mine as to-do.md, to-do list.
Yeah.
And yeah, I kept them there. And then when you graduate, go back and build all those things. I mean, there's not going to be any more curriculum. You'll get access to all the curriculum, but I would say to continue to make your things better. It's great fodder every day. Yeah, it's also great fodder for interviewing. Yeah. Oh, tell me about this app you built. Well, I did this. Right now I'm working on adding this to it, and I really want to add this to it, but I haven't gotten to that point yet. But right now, yesterday I was writing code to add this feature. Employers love that, because it's not like I did a project and then I left it forever. It's, I enjoy this. I like doing this. I'm passionate about it. I'm doing it right now. Even though I did this project 6 months ago, I'm still working on it. I still want to make it better. I'm still, excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah. Here's this paper, 180 pages.
I don't think I'll be reading it anytime. Maybe one day.
Yeah.
I feel like I've bought so many books over the last few months since I've been doing this. I've got a stack sitting here that I need to really read through. So
yeah, I have so many on my wish list, but I also have a stack of, articles online that I've just bookmarked too.
Yeah, I've been wearing out the bookmark on my browser. I need to organize it, but it's just, there's a lot to take in. So with the curriculum and then other additional reading, so I guess when I get finished, it'll be a good time to go back on all that stuff and read up, go do a little bit of a deep dive on all those things.
Yeah. I think at one point I just told myself, I'm going to save all this stuff, and when I get the job, I'll see what technology I'm working in, and then I'll dive into that.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I could dive into Ruby, but what if I get a JavaScript job? Like,
you're right.
I could dive into JavaScript, and then what if I get a Ruby job? Or I could dive into Rails, and then what if I get, a Hanami job? Or I could dive into React, and then what if somebody hires me for Angular? Like, it didn't.
You just don't know, right?
Yeah.
You don't really know. So that's smart.
Yeah. It helped some, because I was like, I don't feel like I should learn everything. But it also didn't help, because then I was like, I still want to keep learning. I need something to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to keep, because it feels like with this, I mean, as soon as you stop using something, it kind of falls out of your head, or at least it does for me.
I think it sticks more than people think it does. If you come back to it, like, I teach these study groups, and I haven't worked or written Rails except study groups since May. And, I can still explain it and talk people through it and troubleshoot it, and, have people bring me Rails projects and jump into it and figure it out, and find the problems and stuff. So I think it sticks more than we like to think.
Well, I hope so. I feel like I haven't touched JavaScript in so long since starting the program. So I'm hoping when I get back into it, I'll remember what I forgot, or what I think I forgot.
Yeah, I think you'll be surprised at what you remember, and also how you understand it better by learning a different language, because it's all patterns. Like REST, it's a design pattern. So, the same problem, you use a for loop, or not a for loop, but like a loop for an each loop in Ruby.
Yeah.
You use a for loop for in JavaScript. And you'll say, oh, I know all the problems that I can solve with this piece of code that I didn't know I could solve before with it. And it's just syntax at that point.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping, because I guess with JavaScript, I didn't get into object-oriented programming, but I think it was like prototypal inheritance, and that stuff went way over my head. So I'm hoping now that I've worked in object-oriented Ruby, it'll help me a little bit with that.
Yeah, and there's a great Let's see if I can find it real quick. I'll actually stop recording.